Hey everybody, welcome back. It's Mike, and today we're going to make something just a little bit more complicated than the spool caps that we made. So here I've got the platform for a tripod that we're going to replicate for fun. Always use some extra tripod platforms. So the first thing we're going to do for this one is we're going to take a tracing. This just gives us the rough shape that we can then import into Blender. Actually, let's see, let's get a little creative. Okay, here we go. Scrape the bottoms cause a little bit of issue with the paper. So we're just doing this just to get the rough shape, so we can kind of match it when we import an image. Okay, so next thing we need is the rough positions of these. Now, we're going to take some measurements with the calipers too. This is again just to approximate. Okay, calipers. So now, take some measurements. Let's see. So this piece, we're going to take two measurements. First, we're going to measure the top of this pyramid shape and then the base. So the top appears to be about 38 millimeters. So we're just going to draw a quick sketch. Top here is 38 millimeters. Then we want the base, which is 43. And this looks like it's square, so we're just going to verify. Yeah, it's square. Okay, so we can see that the base is roughly centered in this shape. The base here, and the screw is roughly centered as well. I think the important part there, let's see, now that can be approximated. The important part is this. This is, I believe, is probably standardized. And this is also spring-loaded, which probably helps keep this screw from unscrewing by putting a little bit of pressure on the device that this is actually attached to. Unfortunately, we're not going to be replicating that, but we can make the pin, and that will help it from rotating, or at the very least make the hole for the screw. The screw itself appears to be about, well, say 6 millimeters. So we need a 6 millimeter hole that goes through the base. And then let's see, how high is this? Measure this height. Just eyeball it to the base here. And it looks like it's about, oh, I don't know. We'll say 9 millimeters. Let's just say 8.8. 8.8. Maybe we can do that. We can always round it up later if we want. Yeah, we'll say 8.8. Okay, now this part, we could probably design this however we want. We'll experiment. But I guess just to try to replicate it, we'll say it's, say 5.5 millimeters for this piece here. Horrible drawing. Say 5.5 millimeters. Okay. And then our holes right about there. Okay, so this gives us something that we can import into Blender. It ain't pretty, but we'll get the job done. Import an image, And then we have a couple different approaches. We can either use pre-built shapes and then cut them down and morph them, or we can also use an approach of, I guess you could call it stippling or extruding points into edges in the shape that we need, and then extruding it. We'll experiment with one or the other. I think in this case maybe we'll go with the point extrusion approach. Okay, on the blender. Okay, for this one I've recorded a narration on top of the video so that we can try to go through as quickly as possible. Here, I've opened a new file. I'm setting up the units for the workspace, so it'll import Kira, removing the cube. Then I'm going to add an empty image and then load in our hand draft. After we load in the hand draft, we got to scale it up, orient the camera, rotate the image into place, and then we're going to take and we're going to create a plane as a starting point. And we're going to remove, first we've got to scale it down, then we're going to remove 3 of the 4 vertices on that plane. Here we're just moving the image just behind our plane. Alright, remove the vertices, and we're going to take the one that's remaining and we're going to use that to build from. And before we do that, we're going to enable the mirror modifier on the X and Y axis. That way, as we create points, they'll be automatically duplicated. And then at the end, we'll just have to merge four sets of points. So here, we're going to extrude along the Y axis, and then we're going to just hand extrude, not locking to an axis, for the rest of the object, or for the rest of the picture, should I say. Then once we're done, we're going to take and go back into object mode, apply the mirror, go back into edit mode. We're going to select the 2 sets of points at each of these 4 locations, and then we're going to use Alt-M and merge at center, so that all of these points are joined, creating a complete circuit, if you will. That will allow us to create a face from those points. Now that we have the face created, we should be able to extrude in the Y-axis, or sorry, the Z-axis, which is blue. And that measurement for that, I believe, was about 5.5 millimeters. So we're going to try to get it to about that size. Now, one thing you will notice in this video is that I did create the width here correctly to 65 millimeters roughly, but the height on this particular view you see now, I actually made it about 46 millimeters when the measurement was actually 51. At the end of the video, at least the end of the blender portion, you'll see where I correct that. Okay, here we're just doing some additional tweaking on the size to get it to that 5.5 millimeters. Alright, very good. I'm just orienting the camera, making sure everything looks like it's aligned. Now we're bringing in a cube to use as the base. Now the top of the cube will be about 38 millimeters, and the bottom of the cube will be about 43. First we set up our measure it, our measure it tool segments, so we can see the size. Once that's in place, we select the top, scale it. We'll scale it down, and we're going to decrease the height. The height's about 8.8 millimeters. Here I'm just going to eyeball it using the grid cubes, the smaller grid cubes, which are each 1 millimeter. I think the final height actually comes out to be about 9 or 9.5, which should be okay. So here, just kind of eyeballing it. Alright, very good. Okay, now we have an inset component to this lower platform that we have to create. So with that bottom face selected, we're actually going to extrude and scale on the 2 axes to create an interior wall. Then we're going to extrude again, scale it down just a little bit, and then we're going to switch views and pull that still selected face upward in the Z to create that inset aspect to that lower part of the C-mount. Here we then scale so that the walls look approximately the same thickness all the way up the sides of the inset. Okay, here we're using the Boolean modifier to join the upper and lower segments. We apply, and then we'll be able to remove the measurements and the cube as well. Alright, we're just left with the one object called plane, which is what we built our top platform out of. Okay, the next thing we'll need to do is create that center hole for the mount screw. Here, X-ray is still on, so we'll have to turn that off here in a minute. Most likely, yeah. No, looks like we'll keep X-ray on for a little bit, but yeah. Okay, so here we're going to turn X-ray off, that way we don't misselect the vertices. There we go. Create the measurement, and this piece is going to be about 6 millimeters in diameter. Scale it down. After we scale it down in these two axes, we'll have to scale it in the Z-axis to make sure we punch through the whole piece. Now, something to keep in mind when working with these here, we're not worrying too much about some of the very coarse faces, like with this cylinder. It has very, you can see kind of the different angles that make up the cylinder's walls. You can use a higher resolution piece. Now, just to cover, what we did there is we just used another Boolean modifier to punch that hole. We used the Boolean difference seen in the last video. Okay. We save our file, and then save it for export. And we're going to load it into Cure and see if it looks right. Okay, and alright. File's loading in. Now, currently I have layer view selected, which is a little slower. You'll notice I'll switch it to solid view. And that usually allows it to be more responsive. And our model, if you'll notice, that left selector was actually 65 millimeters, so that's pretty good. Here we're reorienting so that when we print, we're trying to avoid as much scaffolding as possible, although these angled edges may also require scaffolding. But a test run of the print will help us with that. So what we're actually going to do is create a print that is a fraction of the size. I think these end up being a little bit too small. We'll land on 50% as the magic number. Yeah, which has a 13-minute print speed, so that's pretty good to try out, and then see how well it prints. Alright, so in this segment, we're just going to enlarge the height of the top of the C-mount from, let's see, it was 65 millimeters by 43 is what I made it originally. In this segment, we're going to enlarge that to 65 by 51. So here I'm working on trying to select just the vertices that I need to manipulate. Unfortunately, through this video, to make a few mistakes, I have to reselect. And here you can see me deselecting the pieces for the lower part of the mount so that they don't get scaled. And unfortunately, yeah, there we go. And then we trying to figure out how to deselect. It turns out, I believe it is Control and then click drag the selector box to deselect a set of vertices. Anyway, that's what I'm trying to figure out in this portion where I'm constantly reselecting. Yeah, it's figured it out. But anyway, so I ended up having to reselect all the key vertices anyway, because I deselected during that process. Yeah, there we go. Next angle. Oh, yeah. Now doing it in this direction so that, there we go, those edges are all selected. There we go. Very good. Alright, so now I'm going to go in and, yeah, forgot to measure it in, so going to probably have to reselect, or am I eyeballing it? Nope, looks like I'm eyeballing it with the 1mm by 1mm group cubes. That's the small cubes on the display right now. And then I'm measuring the result, see if I got it right. And it looks like I got it pretty close. So that's good. And we're going to save. Oh. Yeah, save out to STL. And then re-import into Cura. Anyway, after that was done, then I moved into printing the miniature. Here we're just removing it. Remember, for this ABS plastic, I've found, at least with my printer, using the brim is key. And yeah, here just removing the brim, and it's a miniature, so there's going to be some imperfections. The main thing that we're doing with this miniature is to ensure that the orientation works, that the general print design works. Sometimes if you have a more complicated object, you may try to print it and there's an angle that the printer just can't handle. So oftentimes it's good to test print first. Now the next step we'll be taking is to print the first full-size prototype. Okay, print finished. This print is the full-size version. Here's the miniature next to it. Looks like it printed alright. Let's scrape it off and scrape and peel and see what we got. Alright, so here's our piece. Just got to take off the brim that we printed. My trusted knife. And just scrape along the edge. Just like that. Okay, so looks like it didn't do too bad. Not bad for a rough print anyway, or draft print, and just using very coarse models. So here's the original next to it. There's the new one. Hole could use a little bit of adjustment. I could always use a drill press to bore that out. Now, this is not a solid print with what I did. You can print solid, but it takes much longer, which, if you're going to prep something for drilling, you'll want to have a larger inner shell wall, I think it is, so that you have some meat to drill out. Otherwise, we'll just end up hitting an empty cavity, and then we'll cause the structure to degrade. Now, a couple things to note that I realized while this is printing is this C-mount may work, and we're going to test it, but I did want to make a note that when I measured, I actually made a goof. I wanted to show you. You have a pair of calipers. It's got these nice beveled edges. Don't be silly like me and then insert it all the way in and get a measurement of 38. You might want to make sure that, you know, extra space isn't being given because of these square ends. You actually want to use the beveled ends and then measure, get it nice and tight in there. You'll notice it's actually 35. So my angle's a little off with the C-mount. That's okay. We're gonna give it a test. All right, let's see. Ta-da! Maiden voyage. All right, yeah, pretty close. We'll notice that it doesn't actually move closed, and I think that's because my angle's a little off. So you can actually notice the. Okay, so through the process, I ended up having a variety of issues to the point where I went through 4 or 5 iterations, mostly around making that issue with that first measurement from 38 needed to be 35 millimeters, and then the final iteration being a little footer that I missed, which we'll go into now. All right, so final results of going through a few iterations. First one you guys saw is the Mini, which we used to test the orientation. Then we've got our various failed attempts. The first one was too big. Then we had one that had too much looseness. Then I had another one which was pretty close, but still a little loose. And then the final iteration is this one. And what I noticed is I had the measurements right, but then there's actually, if you look, there's like a 2 millimeter foot on this thing, which was show the original, which I did not have in my first design. You can see there's a nice sharp edge, and it turns out that that's actually a pretty critical piece to help this clamp in. So this last iteration, if I can figure out how to do it one-handed, there we go. Push down, clamp it in. It's actually nice and in there, nice and firm. So there you have it. I'm going to see if I can link the final Blender model in STL file in case anybody's interested, but I encourage you to try out Blender and go through the process to learn how to, prototype pieces yourself. It's actually pretty fun. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this, and come back again soon. Thank you.